Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, where I dissect the films that had a hand in shaping the worldview of those of us who were born somewhere in the range of 1965 to 1980. The 1984 musical fantasy Streets of Fire was directed by Walter Hill, who'd made his name directing the 1979 cult favorite The Warriors. Hill also directed such 80s staples as 48 Hours, Brewster's Millions, and Red Heat. The screenplay for Streets of Fire was written by Hill and his frequent collaborator, Larry Gross. We open in what a title card tells us is another time in another place, in an unnamed and fictional city. Wherever we are, it's a mishmash of the 1980s and the 1950s. Streets of Fire was filmed in both Chicago and Los Angeles, as well as the Universal Studios backlot, and the set designers did a good job of creating a place that seems familiar and yet unknown, and unmoored in any particular moment in time. A huge crowd of people begins to assemble for a benefit concert by rock's hottest act, Ellen Aim and the Attackers. Ellen, a hometown girl who made it big, takes the stage and rips into a performance of Nowhere Fast. Ellen is played by Diane Lane, who was only 18 at the time but was already a rising star due to big roles in The Outsiders and Rumblefish, both of which were directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Nowhere Fast was written by Jim Steinman, who gave us such big, bombastic, impassioned hits as Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart and Air Supply's Making Love Out of Nothing at All. If you like those songs, I do, you will like Nowhere Fast. Ellen's vocals are provided by singers Laurie Sargent and Holly Sherwood. A motorcycle gang called the Bombers rolls into town and bursts into the concert venue. The leader of the gang is the splendidly named Raven Shaddock, played by a very young Willem Dafoe, who was cast for this role on the strengths of his performance as a biker in Catherine Bigelow's The Loveless. He'd rise to fame in 1986 with his performance in Oliver Stone's Platoon, and ever since then he's played a steady succession of highly entertaining villains, including the Green Goblin in Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man. Raven rushes the stage and, with the help of his goons, beats up the band members, throws Ellen over his shoulder kicking and screaming, and saunters out of the venue. He and his goons drive off on their motorcycles, taking Ellen with them and causing chaos and destruction along the way. The look of the Bombers evokes a very specific 1950s fetishistic motorcycle gang image. This is a style made famous by Marlon Brando in the 1953 film The Wild One, and examined by Kenneth Anger's 1963 experimental film Scorpio Rising. Whatever you think of Streets of Fire, it's hard to deny this is a film with a great deal of style. The Bombers are pursued by cops who include Officer Cooley, played by Rick Rossovich, who appeared in many prominent films throughout the 80s, including The Terminator and Top Gun, and Officer Ed Price, played by Beyoncé's stepfather, Richard Lawson, who appeared in 1982's Poltergeist and the 1983 NBC miniseries V. Raven's goons include his right-hand man Greer, played by Lee Ving, frontman of the hardcore punk band Fear. Ving is probably most recognized by film audiences for his role as Mr. Body in 1985's Clue. A diner waitress named Reva Cody types a letter to her brother Tom asking for his help. Reva is played by Too Close for Comfort star Deborah Van Valkenburg, who also appeared in The Warriors. Reva's fellow waitress Addie is played by Miami Vice star Olivia Brown in a blink and you'll miss her performance. Tom Cody comes to town by train on a dark and rainy night. Tom is played by Michael Pare, riding high off of his starring performance in 1983's Eddie and the Cruisers. The Roadmasters, a local gang of thugs in bowling jackets and patterned pants, bursts into the diner to harass Reva. In many ways, Streets of Fire is a spiritual sequel to Hill's iconic earlier film, The Warriors, which featured numerous warring street gangs who each featured their own distinct and often outright gimmicky look. The leader of the Roadmasters is played by Paul Moniz, who was also in The Warriors, and who played the villain in the greatest 80s B-movie of all time, Tough Turf. Billy jumps to his sister's defense by slapping the gang leader silly, then beating the rest up with a coat rack before throwing them out of the diner and stealing their shiny red convertible. While joyriding in the stolen car, Tom and Reva are stopped for speeding by officers Cooley and Price. Even though Tom is driving a stolen car, and even though Price has a long and acrimonious history with Tom, the cops let them go with a warning because, well, the cops in this film are not especially good at their jobs. It turns out that Ellen Aim is Tom's ex-girlfriend, and Reva wants Tom to rescue her from Raven and the Bombers. Tom, who has recently left the military, still nurses a great deal of resentment towards Ellen over the breakup, so he's not sold on the idea of rescuing her. He drinks at a local bar, where the bartender, Clyde, is played by the late and much-missed Bill Paxton, known for films like Aliens, Twister, and Weird Science. A tough ex-soldier named McCoy punches out Clyde when he insults her. McCoy is played by Amy Madigan, known for Field of Dreams and Places in the Heart. Apparently the role was written with Edward James Olmos in mind, but the filmmakers liked Madigan so much they gender-flipped the part for her. McCoy has nowhere to stay, so Tom invites her to crash with him at Reva's house. At Reva's place, Tom thinks back over his relationship with Ellen, over memories of Ellen singing a song called Never Be You, which was written by Tom Petty. Tom stops by an auto body shop to pick up a whole bunch of weapons from his friend Pete, who is played by John Dennis Johnson. Tom, Reva, and McCoy meet with Ellen's current boyfriend and manager, an arrogant and unpleasant jerk named Billy Fish. Billy is played by Rick Moranis, then known for his work on the Canadian sketch comedy show SCTV. Moranis would rise to fame in 1984 with Ghostbusters, which was released in theaters 1 week after Streets of Fire. Tom tells Billy he'll get Ellen back for 10 grand. Billy is obnoxious and loathsome, and he and Tom hate each other on sight. McCoy offers her services for a 10% cut, and Tom reluctantly takes her up on it. Tom, Billy, and McCoy head into Bombers territory to find Ellen. The Bombers hang out in a dangerous, seedy neighborhood called The Battery, which is confusing because this is clearly not meant to be New York. Inside a tough nightclub called Torchies, the rockabilly band The Blasters performs on stage, singing One Bad Stud and Blue Shadows, while a go-go dancer dances and strips on the bar. The dancer is played by French actress and dancer Marine Jahan, who was one of Jennifer Beals' body doubles in Flashdance. Torchies is a big Bombers hangout, and Raven is keeping Ellen tied to a bed in an upstairs room. Raven is convinced he can make Ellen fall in love with him. Ellen is less convinced of this. I have a lot of thoughts about Raven's outfit. Willem Dafoe will spend the film looking like he's ready to model for a Tom of Finland drawing, which is a really good look for him. Streets of Fire is the rare film where you might catch yourself thinking, you know, Willem Dafoe is kind of sexy. In The Battery, McCoy, Billy, and Tom encounter a shifty vagrant named Ben Gunn, played by prolific actor and noted environmental advocate Ed Begley Jr. Ben tells the gang that Ellen is being held at Torchies. While Billy waits in the car, McCoy enters Torchies through the front, and Tom prowls around on the roof. Inside the bar, McCoy hooks up with a bomber named Squirt, played by Harry Beer. Squirt takes McCoy into the back of the club, and she pistol whips him unconscious. McCoy finds Raven and holds him at gunpoint while Tom sets about rescuing Ellen. From the roof, Tom causes a distraction by shooting up motorcycles, then bursts into Torchies and frees Ellen. Tom, McCoy, and Ellen flee the club, with Billy driving the getaway car. Billy, Ellen, and McCoy speed to safety, while Tom stays behind to further annoy the Bombers. Tom blows a whole bunch of stuff up and sets the streets on fire, because we are meant to take the film's title very literally. He runs into Raven, who gleefully tells him he'll be coming after him. Tom rejoins the others, and over a flashback of Ellen singing the Stevie Nicks penned song Sorcerer, Tom, McCoy, Billy, and Ellen wander through crowded city streets trying to keep a low profile on their way back to the Richmond. They're approached by Baby Doll, a big fan of Ellen's, who warns them the police are sweeping the streets in search of whoever caused all the big fires and explosions in the Battery. Baby Doll is played by Elizabeth Daly, often known as E.G. Daly, whom we saw back in Valley Girl. To hide from the cops, Tom and the gang, with Baby Doll in tow, hijack a creaky old bus transporting a struggling doo-wop band called the Sorrells. The Sorrells are led by Bird, played by Stoney Jackson, known for Michael Jackson's Beat It video, and also for the 1992 action film Trespass, which was also directed by Walter Hill. Bird's bandmates include Lester, played by actor-director Robert Townsend, known for The Five Heartbeats and Hollywood Shuffle, Reggie, played by Grand L. Bush, who played Balrog in the delightfully terrible live-action 1995 version of Street Fighter, and BJ, played by Forrest Gump's Michael T. Williamson. While McCoy drives the bus, the Sorrells sing Countdown to Love. As with Diane Lane, the actors do not do their own singing. Their vocals are credited to Winston Ford. When they encounter a police roadblock, Tom and McCoy blow up some cop cars and they all manage to escape. They take a train back to the Richmond, where the entire neighborhood jubilantly celebrates the triumphant return of Ellen. Raven meets with Officer Price to strike a deal. The Bombers will leave the Richmond alone in exchange for Tom. Instead, Price orders Tom to leave town, assuring him the police will take care of the Bombers. Tom stops by Billy and Ellen's place to pick up his payment for rescuing Ellen. He takes $1,000 for McCoy's cut, but refuses the rest of the money. Realizing she's still in love with Tom, Ellen takes off after him, and they kiss passionately in the rain before going back to Reva's place to shag. Ellen and Tom make plans to leave town together. At Clyde's bar, Tom pays McCoy her share, and Tom, Ellen, and McCoy leave town on the train. One odd quirk of Streets of Fire is the way people keep entering and leaving town on the train, except when we see it, it's always a subway train or an elevated train instead of a passenger train like Amtrak. It's generally not possible to get very far out of town on a subway. When the train pulls into a station, Tom punches out Ellen without warning so she won't follow him, which is a really bizarre and excessively violent thing for him to do. He knocks her unconscious and leaves her with McCoy on the train while he hops across the platform and takes a train back into town for his showdown with Raven. Raven arrives in the Richmond, where he's challenged by Officers Price and Cooley. Raven blows an air horn and summons dozens of bombers. Before the situation can explode into violence, Tom arrives. Tom and Raven attack each other with sledgehammers for a really long time, and then they engage in fisticuffs, and eventually Tom reigns supreme. Faced by a horde of angry armed citizens, the bombers slink off in disgrace. In front of a crowd of screaming fans, the Sorrells perform I Can Dream About You. The version we hear in the film is performed by Winston Ford. I Can Dream About You was written by Dan Hartman, who recorded his own version for the Streets of Fire soundtrack album. Hartman's version was released as a single, where it reached the top 10 on the Billboard charts. At the concert, Billy and Tom behave civilly to each other for the very first time. Billy says he's willing to step aside if Tom wants to be with Ellen, and Tom tells him that Ellen will be happier with Billy. Tom bids a bittersweet farewell to Ellen before leaving town with McCoy. Ellen takes the stage and performs another song written by Jim Steinman, Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young. Deeper and Deeper by The Fix plays over the end credits. There's enough music in Streets of Fire to classify it as a musical, and the music is all pretty good. The score is by prolific musician/composer Ry Cooder, who also provided the acclaimed soundtrack for Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, which Dave Grohl has listed as one of his all-time favorite albums. As well as being a musical, though, Streets of Fire also contains elements of the noir genre, such as dark rainy streets, dangerous locales, a brooding and bitter anti-hero, and a femme fatale who lures him into trouble. Streets of Fire is also both a biker film and a traditional action film. According to screenwriter Larry Gross, Walter Hill wanted to direct a comic book film that wasn't based on an existing comic book, and you can certainly see that influence in the finished product. Beautifully filmed by cinematographer Andrew Laszlo, Streets of Fire is stylized and sleek, with dark rainy streets punctuated with bursts of bright color. It's also highly influenced by MTV. Streets of Fire has the look and feel of a 90-minute music video. Hill has described Streets of Fire as his teenaged idea of a perfect movie because it contains, and I'm quoting here, custom cars, kissing in the rain, neon, trains in the night, high-speed pursuit, rumbles, rock star, motorcycles, jokes in tough situations, leather jackets, and questions of honor. Honestly, that's not all that different from my idea of the perfect film. If I were a studio head and Walter Hill had come to me with that pitch, I would have said, yes, Mr. Hill, here is your pile of money. Please make that movie for me. And Streets of Fire is, as you can probably tell, a lot of fun. But it's also a little simple and a lot light on story. It sounds like it's going to be non-stop chaos. It's a musical and a biker flick and a noir, and it's set in this fantastical mishmash of different time periods. And while I think Hill and Gross were smart under those circumstances to keep the story at the heart of their screenplay simple and uncluttered, I wish there were more to that story. This is a film that moves from point A to point B without subplots or unexpected plot twists. Streets of Fire was a commercial failure, making back about half of its budget. Michael Pare's performance as Tom tends to get mentioned a lot as a key reason why the film failed. Hill and Gross were apparently unhappy with Pare, who wasn't their first choice for the role. They wanted Tom Cruise, who had other commitments. I think Pare is fine, though his performance is pretty low energy, especially compared to the bristling and weird intensity Willem Dafoe brings to Raven. Diane Lane is unfathomably beautiful as Ellen, and you can see how her kidnapping would kickstart the events of the plot into action. Walter Hill has described Ellen as a rock and roll Helen of Troy, and that seems pretty apt. There's a problem, though, in that Tom and Ellen don't seem to like each other very much, and not in an outward loathing to disguise barely concealed sparks beneath the surface kind of way. There's simply no chemistry between the actors. Ellen and Billy Fish also don't seem to like each other very much, so the love triangle between Tom and Ellen and Billy at the core of the film ends up seeming like an afterthought. It's very difficult to care who Ellen ends up with. Even so, Streets of Fire is kind of a blast. It's a perfect fable for those of us raised on MTV. It's stylish and loud and has just enough giddy weirdness to stick in the memory after the credits roll. Next time, I'm examining the violent and pointed social commentary of Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you then.